Right when the Dolphins regain the services of one of the team's star players, they lose another. Welcome to the Friday edition of Dolphins In Depth, the podcast provided to you by the Miami Herald. I'm your host, Miami Dolphins columnist Omar Kelly, and joining me is Barry Jackson from
Omar, quite a week, huh? What a week of news. Unbelievable. And this franchise, I'm telling you, I know there are injuries all around the league, but this franchise has the worst luck with news today that Zach Sieler sustained a broken orbital bone in practice when someone poked him in the eye. Why do these things always happen to the Miami Dolphins?
You know, I've always had that thought process, and then you check other teams' injuries and waiver wire claims, and you realize everybody's got drama. Minnesota just lost their starting offensive tackle. You know, this is the nature of this league: attrition, injuries. That's why you have a 53-man roster and now 16 guys on the practice squad. And I got to admit, Barry, today was a challenge, primarily because you lose Zach Sieler at least for a game. Mike McDaniel described it as week to week. Zach Sieler, if you have been under a rock, let me just, for a player, dollar for dollar in the NFL, he's probably one of the biggest bargains in the NFL. Arguably the second best Dolphins defender behind Jalen Ramsey. Some people might argue it might be Calais Campbell. Sieler is a pillar of granite reliability. I was having a great season. And then somehow Thursday's practice, he gets poked in the eye. It breaks an orbital bone and more than likely will be sidelined at least a week or two. I'm sure, knowing Zach and his blue-collar mentality, he's going to play with a mask. He's going to return. He's not going to be sidelined too long. But this might be a situation like Javon Holland where they got to wait for the stitching or the swelling to subside before they throw him into the action, fearing that they will worsen the situation. And you know how Mike McDaniel is. He errs on the side of caution as opposed to throwing players out there, which is a weird reputation to have, considering, you know, the national media thinks you just threw Tua to the wind, caution to the wind, and put him out there in 2022. But that's not who Mike McDaniel is. What challenges, before we even get into the Tua part of the discussion, we've been talking about Tua all week, been talking about him all month. What challenges does now Zach Sieler's absence create for this defensive line, Barry?
Yeah, it's a problem. As you said, Sieler's value goes so under the radar sometimes. It's never a good time to lose him, but especially these next 2 weeks because Arizona, 6th in the league in rushing offense. James Conner, 6th in the league in rushing yards. He averages over 4 yards per pop. Then Buffalo will follow. We know how the Bills have become a successful run-oriented offense since replacing Ken Dorsey as offensive coordinator last year. They're run-heavy. They've done it effectively. James Cook obviously hurt the Dolphins in that Thursday night game. So this is not a good time to lose Zach Sieler. Not that any time is. We'll see Deshaun Hand, more of him. He's had a solid year. I know you're a Deshaun Hand guy. We'll see a little bit more of Benito Jones, who's not had a very good year, if you believe the metric sites. We'll see a little more of Brandon Peely. And I talked to Calais Campbell today. He said he does expect to have to play a little bit more, but he said at age 38, there's a limit to how much he can play, where he can be as effective as he needs to be at his age. He's played 63% of the defensive snaps for Atlanta last year, 56% of Miami's defensive snaps this year, Omar. So to expect Calais to go up from 56 to 70 is unrealistic. Sieler, on the other hand, consistently plays in the high 70% range of the team's defensive snaps. He's kind of a freak of nature in that regard with his stamina level. So it's going to be a challenge. They did bring in a practice squad defensive lineman today, Matt Dickerson, who has played 36 NFL games, including 13 for KC last year. He's been a rotational NFL defensive lineman. Last year, he played 190 snaps for the Chiefs. And as you made the point to me, he's more of Sieler's body type than Neil Farrell, who's a former LSU defensive tackle, who's the other defensive lineman on their practice squad. So maybe we see this NFL veteran journeyman, Matt Dickerson, added to the mix tomorrow. Campbell, Calais Campbell, Deshaun Hand, Brandon Peely, and Benito Jones. But going into that group, going into a game, I should say, run-heavy opponents without Zach Sieler, it has me leaning a little Arizona. Sunday. I hate to admit it, Omar, but at least they get back Agba, they get back Javon Holland, so those are positives.
Lose Cater Kohu though, and now that's not a good spot to be in because Cater's an important, valuable nickel. Storm Duck is also going to play, but we talked to Jalen Ramsey today, and Jalen Ramsey is a Cam Smith fan. We've known this going back to when general manager Chris Greer basically said Jalen Ramsey endorses Cam Smith. It's good enough for me. Jalen believes that Cam is going to be able to play well. Cam's got all the tools that he needs, said he had a good, strong week of practice. This is what you're supposed to say about the young veterans. But I've heard that going back to last year that Cam was playing well and practicing well. There was just a certain curmudgeon that wanted to just basically knock him down from a confidence standpoint.
The man's initials, perhaps? Could it be rhymes with Mangio? But I tell you what, I'm excited to see Jalen Ramsey in the slot, some Cam Smith outside. I guess the other option we'll see some of is Javon Holland in the slot. And then
Teron Neal.
Safety lineup with Marcus May and Jordan Poyer. I think that's the other option. Anthony Weaver threw out Teron Neal as another slot option. That would seem the least appealing of the group. Nothing against Teron Neal, but which of those scenarios
he's actually needed? He's actually needed for his role as a gunner, and people don't realize how valuable a gunner is. You can spend 12 years in the league as just a gunner alone. That's the guy who's running downfield, going against blocking, going against two blockers who are trying to throw him into the Gatorade machine, and his job is to stop the punt returner from returning the ball or down the ball at 2-yard line. We watch special teams practices every single day. And I tell you, Teron Neal is probably the Michael Jordan of stopping the ball at the 1-yard line. I have not seen that many clutch stops during practice, obviously, but he's a pretty good player. I like what I see from Jalen Ramsey in the nickel, and I think closer to the line of scrimmage is ideal for him in this game, in this situation, because of who they're facing. Kyler Murray, as Anthony Weaver talks about it, he is like the Tyreek Hill of quarterbacks in terms of small stature, compact build, super fast, super quick. I believe he had a 44-yard touchdown run last week. Dynamic. I think they had an overhead view of the play, and I don't even know if they sped it up, but he looked like the Mighty Mouse Roadrunner. Listen, if you're going to play Jalen Ramsey in the slot, it opens the door for Cam Smith to play out on the boundary. You know who needs Cam Smith to play well out on the boundary, Barry?
Who?
Chris Greer.
Yes, he does. If ever a guy needs a break, right, or one of his draft picks to really show, it's Chris Greer, and it's this week. And you know what's going to be very interesting on Sunday? Kyler Murray's had a pretty effective year, 9 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, but he's averaged fewer than 200 yards passing per game. He is 27th in the league in rushing yards among all players. But it's interesting that they haven't weaved in the rookie who was so highly touted, Marvin Harrison Jr. out of Ohio State. They haven't weaved him in nearly as much as people expected. People were predicting he could be the offensive rookie of the year. He's cut 3 or fewer passes in several games so far. So is Sunday the day that they try to get a favorable matchup with Harrison and throw the ball to him? I'm concerned about a few aspects of Arizona's passing game. Trey McBride, a tight end who's effective. And also, where's the pass rush going to come from? So at least you get Agba back. Chop Robinson, no pressures at all in the 16 pass rushing snaps last week's first NFL sack. Here's what's going to be interesting. I could have sworn there was like one
pressure in there. I could have sworn there was like
no pressure by a single Dolphins outside linebacker last week, except Mo Kamara, who had 2 in 7 pass rush chances in his NFL debut. So here's my question for you. Mo Kamara earned high praise from Anthony Weaver this week. He touched the quarterback twice in 7 chances last week. However, with Agba back, you got Agba, Chop Robinson, Tyus Bowser ahead of him. Do you weave in Kamara and keep him active on Sunday, or do you play Quentin Bell some? Should Mo Kamara take some of Chop Robinson's snaps, even though that makes it look bad for the GM to have his first-round pick replaced to an extent by the 5th-round pick?
If you give a rookie who has not played all season a smidgen of success and then take it away from him, what message are you sending him? What message are you sending to the team?
Bingo. Mo Kamara has to play a little bit at least.
Yeah. I can honestly tell you that I've been quite surprised at how limited they have used Chop Robinson in terms of a elephant package in terms of a guy who moves around the line and blitzes from different spots. Now, with that said, they've got such a need for edge players that they probably just say, hey, this is on your plate. Learn how to do this. And I got to say, the one thing that I was really pleased and really encouraged by this week is that Thursday after practice, Teron Armstead spent a great deal of time working with Chop Robinson and talking to him and mentoring him and showing him counters and say, you do this and I'm going to do this. You do that and I'm going to do this. You got, and Teron, as you know, is a mastermind when it comes to offensive line play, when it comes to blocking, when it comes to, diagnosing what a pass rusher is doing. So when he's helping Chop diagnose his game and telling him, giving him pointers on how to approach things, that can only help. And I don't think while Chop is not getting the productivity, I don't think that that's an indictment on the fact that he's not playing well or he's not succeeding. I think he can certainly get better from an edge setting standpoint, but I think that's a challenge for most rookies. But the pass rushing, we all see it. It comes in bunches. It heats up. And all it takes is one sack for that young man to gain confidence, and it will release so much pressure. And then he won't have this performance anxiety issues that he's had. To me, I think it's more about the edge setting. I worry and focus more on the edge setting than I do getting pressure. They are a very good defense with just the threat of pressure. They are right now one of the best secondaries in the NFL. I don't know how, but they are one of the best secondaries in the NFL. Quarterback rating, yards allowed, and they're doing that without turnovers and without sacks. So my hope is that everything will come when everything is at their disposal. And I think when the offense is having greater success on third downs, that might lead to more rest for the defense. That might lead to a better performance. When the run game is doing better, that might lead to better run defense for this Dolphins defense. Who knows? I mean, but right now, Barry, is there a single thing negative that you can say about the Dolphins defense at this point?
Yes, I would say lack of sacks. Unquestionably is. And that's partly a function of bad luck with injuries with Jalen Phillips. Bradley Chubb still is not back, not having Agba last week. But I'm with you in terms of Chop. Even though he hasn't had a sack yet, it's not been a debacle of a rookie season. He's not an embarrassment when you throw him out there. But you do have higher expectations for first-round. It's fair and it's reasonable. And even though there's some rookie pass rushers who come in and don't light up the world right away, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a couple of sacks this year and persistent pressures from Robinson. By the way, and you were onto this with Teron Armstead working with Chop, but Chop told me today that Teron's like an uncle to him. He's been that much of a mentor to him. So that's encouraging to hear. I've loved the defensive secondary. You're right. How in the world are they doing this without pass rush? I would point to two things. I feel very good about where they are at corner with Ramsey and Fuller as your starters. With Kohu before the neck injury, he's been good this year. There's no question. Passer rating against in the 60s. He's back to what he was as a rookie. That's encouraging. And then you have this young law firm of developmental corners, the law firm of Duck and Cam Smith and Isaiah Johnson. Ethan Bonner, you can throw him into, even though we haven't seen him much this year. Those are longer, for the most part, longer corners. They have the type of tools the Dolphins like. So I'm encouraged to see what that quartet of young corners becomes. But here's the other thing also, Omar. I mean, we have to be real about something. Quarterbacks they faced so far, besides Josh Allen, Anthony Richardson, lowest completion percentage in the league, Jacoby Brissett, Trevor Lawrence, who you could say might be the most overpaid quarterback.
Mason Rudolph. Not you too, Barry.
Despite his physical talents, right?
Not you too, Barry.
So, and obviously, the Mason Rudolph Will Levis combination. God, who's that scaring? So I think opponents certainly has a lot to do with it too. But that being said, if you ask me what spot on the team do you feel good about, corners in my top three. I like their future at cornerback. I think that's a position that they haven't screwed up. How about that?
Listen, they've also played Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith, and a guy that you might recognize. His name is Josh Allen. Those are all Pro Bowl players.
Yeah, just right. I said Allen at the start. But, I mean, who else on that list is a world beater? All due respect to Geno Smith, who's a good NFL quarterback. He's not a top 5 NFL quarterback. So, I mean, that's a factor. I'm not raining on a parade. I said the Dolphins secondary has been good, but they haven't exactly faced a murderer's row of quarterbacks. I think we can all fairly acknowledge that.
I don't know if they're going to face a murderer's row of quarterbacks the rest of the season. And if they finish in the top 5 in defense like they are now, finish in the top 5 in passing yards allowed, finish in the top 5 in quarterback rating, I can guarantee you're going to have a defense that puts you in position to get to a playoff game. Now,
yeah, well, I'd say this. Aaron Rodgers twice, obviously not what he was. He's been erratic. There have been more interceptions, still capable of great throws. December, you have Aaron Rodgers twice, December, January, in your last 5. You face him twice. You face C.J. Stroud, assuming he's not injured once. That's obviously going to be as big a test as any quarterback on the roster, Josh Allen aside, and Brock Purdy, who had his struggles last week, but is still overall a good quarterback. So you face those 4, and then either Jameis Winston or Dorian Thompson, right, with Cleveland. So it's harder last 5 games, unfortunately for them, as far as the quality quarterbacks they face. So I think that'll give us the true test, Omar.
Yeah, certainly. Let's move on to the offense, because everybody knows that the Dolphins will be getting Tua Tagovailoa back. However, we've got a wide receiver in Tyreek Hill who missed Friday's practice because of a foot injury that surfaced on Thursday. Any concern there? And then you've also got Jalen Waddle with the quadriceps injury. Any concern there that we finally get the starting quarterback? We finally get the engine that makes everything go, and now your wheels and rims are not healthy.
Well, with Tyreek, we have to preface this by saying Mike McDaniel said he is, quote, very optimistic that Tyreek will play on Sunday. Tyreek traditionally plays through injuries. The fact that he was listed as questionable certainly raises your antenna, but you have to keep in mind that his own coach has publicly said he's very optimistic about him playing. Also, Tyreek was on social media during practice today, tweeting some things. So I'm not terribly concerned about Tyreek, but at the same time, there has to be some concern, because obviously the foot issue was enough to acknowledge on the injury report. It was enough to keep him out of practice altogether today. And it might have been at least a small reason of signing Dee Eskridge to the 53. Obviously, as you pointed out to me, you need a backup punt returner. So Eskridge can be that behind Malik Washington. But you really needed a 5th receiver on the 53 with Tyreek's foot a little gimpy and needing another returner. So you have now 5 receivers: Tyreek, Waddle, Odell Beckham, Malik Washington, who will probably be your primary returner, and Dee Eskridge, who can also return. I just want to see those guys play up to their ability, right? Speaking of the 3 veterans, obviously, Tyreek, Waddle, and Beckham. It's not been a great year for Tyreek or Waddle. It's not their fault per se. Obviously, they're a victim of the quarterback play and the decisions made by the team's administration as far as what backup quarterbacks to bring in. Beckham, Dolphins 0 for 4 targeting him. So will Tua be the great cure, the great panacea for these 3 accomplished veteran receivers? Are we going to magically see, Omar, the best of Tyreek, Waddle, and Odell now that Tua is back? Is that unrealistic or fair to expect?
I think it's extremely realistic and fair to expect. As I'm writing in my Sunday column, I think Tua has dug deep into, there's one thing about being sidelined 5 weeks, but how do you use that time? And you know how Tua's used that time? Tua's used that time to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning to join and see what the coaches are doing, to create the game plan, to understand even a greater mastery of the offense. We already know that he's mastered this offense. It's built around him. It's custom made for him. It's so complex because of what he's able and capable of doing. They've just continued to build and add on and add on and add on to the point where nobody else can run it. But the complexity of it, there's the accuracy and precision that he throws to. Like when you watch the coaches film the past couple of weeks, there are throws and windows that these quarterbacks could have hit that they just refuse to pull the trigger on. Well, Tua pulls the trigger with no hesitation. I think when you get that back, you're going to get 3rd down efficiency. You're going to get red zone efficiency. You're going to get more points. All of those things are going to lead to better overall performances. Now, do we have to worry about the turnovers? Do we have to worry about the poor penalty play? Do we have to worry about the miscues, the false starts, the illegal motions? Yeah, those are concerns as well, because now that you've dumbed it down, you're going to have to spend probably the next 3 or 4 weeks turning up the volume. But my concern is there is no room for error right now. I look at this Arizona Cardinals game as a must-win from this standpoint. If you lose this, then you got to go to Buffalo and you got to get that one. Or you could say goodbye to your AFC East hopes.
Yeah, what teams are digging out of a 2-6 hole? You're right. It's just impossible to envision them losing this, coming back to make the playoffs, because then you're sitting at 2-6 if you lose at Buffalo after losing on Sunday. I'm a little worried Sunday about rust with Tua. That was downplayed this week, but any quarterback who's out for 5 weeks in a timing offense in particular, as good as he is at that, you have to worry about rust, slower reactions initially, not because of the concussion, but just because he hasn't played in a while. Arizona's got safeties that can capitalize on that. Budda Baker, Jalen Thompson, as good a combo as there probably is at safety. Now, the good news for the Dolphins is Arizona has a 26th ranked run defense. They have the 26th ranked pass defense. They're not particularly good at rushing quarterback. They really don't have an elite edge rusher. So those would be the positives. They have to make sure that Dennis Gardeck is blocked. He's got 3 sacks for them. He's their team leader. But I just worry a little bit about rust and timing for an offense that's built all around that. I don't know that the offensive eruption comes this week. I think we might be looking more in November. So that would mean if it's a low-scoring game, will their run defense be good enough to win a low-scoring game? That has me a little queasy, Omar, queasy.
To quote Joe Philbin. I don't disagree with you. James Conner, Kyler Murray. I don't think the Dolphins have struggled with either of those opponents throughout the years. Not to say that this is going to carry over into the same kind of caliber of game. I think being at home, I think the environment, yes, it's warm in Arizona, but it's going to be that's a dry heat. This is a humid heat. Hopefully it's going to be a humid day. And finally, the Dolphins can maybe take advantage of a 1:00 kickoff in South Florida. To me, I do agree with you. I worry a little bit about the defensive line and the run stopping, primarily without Zach Sieler. I don't know what it looks like without Zach Sieler. There's no chance that Calais Campbell could play 40 snaps. As impressed as I've been about Deshaun Hand, now we're asking him to double up his workload. You're going to have to need contributions from the nose tackle, Benito Jones. You're going to have to need contributions from Brandon Peely. A practice squad guy is going to have to step up. I am a firm believer that football games are won and lost in the trenches. And if the Dolphins cannot sustain a rushing attack, it could potentially be a long day. But as you've seen in the last 2 weeks, every opponent has known that the Miami Dolphins want to run the ball, and they've run the ball 40 times with a tremendous amount of success. 193 rushing yards against the New England Patriots and 188 rushing yards against the Indianapolis Colts. The question is, can they do it again? Can they do it with Tua back? Can the offense give you that sustained efficiency that we saw in 2022 and 2023? And I know Tua's got a ton of rust that I think he's worked very diligently on working off. I know he doesn't have great chemistry with some of the weaponry that he's got out there. But he's got Tyreek Hill. He's got Jalen Waddle. He's got Jonnu Smith, who he hasn't exactly used efficiently, but the team began to use him efficiently last week. And I think if they can put the running game together, and remember, there are also passes that get thrown to running backs, and we haven't seen that since Tua's absence. You incorporate the running backs into the passing game, I think you will have enough of a sustained offense to be able to put up 24 points. And the way this defense is playing right now, I think all you need is 24 points to pull off a victory.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part. I would ask you this. You have an interesting question at running back because you have to play Raheem Mostert with the body of work, with the speed, with the unique skill set. He deserves to play despite the fumble last week. So then the question is this. Does Jalen Wright deserve more carries that you would take away mostly from Achane, maybe a little bit from Mostert? Jalen Wright's averaging 5.1 yards per carry. Achane and Mostert, who have had very lofty per carry averages earlier in their career, obviously Achane's in his second year, he's below 4 per carry. Mostert limited sample size, below 4 per carry, even though he's a 5.1 career carry guy. So does Jalen, if this is a meritocracy, Omar, then Jalen Wright should be playing more despite Achane's skill, despite what he did last year. Does Jalen Wright have the fair expectation to play more? Should the Dolphins play him more, knowing there's only one football and they have receivers to make happy too, and Jonnu Smith?
I'm going to go with a strong no, Barry. I am seeing this organization for the last 3 years, and I'm a firm believer that they go into the week playing the top performers. They heavily favor the top performers, and If you perform well in practice, you get plays. Remember when Tanner Connor all of a sudden got inserted into the starting lineup against the Seahawks, and we're like, where did that come from? Well, that was earned during the week. And I think if Jalen Wright was out there performing and killing it in his limited opportunities during practice, he'd see his practice time elevated. Now, in fairness to Raheem doesn't participate in all the practice all the time. Devon Achane, last week, coming back from the concussion, heavy workload for him. Clearly that was something that he earned during the week of practice. I'm fine with these coaches continuing to feed Raheem till the wheels fall off, continue to feed Devon Achane till he's proven that he can't handle the workload. And Jalen Wright will be there. I was a little surprised at how they unleashed him in the fourth quarter, but maybe that was a philosophical approach about how to batter down the defense when you're trying to own time of possession. That the one thing that I will acknowledge is in my job, I do not know what these guys do and see during practice to help lean them into the decisions that they make. So I'm not going to sit there and second guess, just because a guy has a 5.1 yards per carry average. He comes into the game in different situations. So, maybe teams are playing more prevent defense when Jalen Wright is on the field. But have I been pressed by the rookie? Absolutely. Do I think that he should be the lead back in this Dolphins offense? Absolutely not. Raheem Mostert has done way more in my mind to prove, outside of the fumble, of course, that he's the number one back, that he needs to be the featured workhorse. He needs to be the lead back. Now, until he proves otherwise, I'm still riding with Raheem. And you?
Yeah, I would ride with Raheem, but I would give Jalen Wright some of Achane's carries, not because of any lost faith in Achane, but just because I think Jalen Wright deserves it. I think he's their best pass blocking back based on what he did at Tennessee, based on what he did in training camp. And I just think he's got a diverse skill set. He and Achane are very comparable talents. I just think Jalen Wright deserves a little bit of a longer look. I want to mention this to you, too, as we talk about the long-term outlook. Obviously, any path to the playoffs begins with a win Sunday. We all agree on that. But here's the other thing I would say. At some point, they're going to need a win, at least one of them in a game where they're a slight underdog, just to compensate for the debacle against Tennessee and losing at Indy. So the game that I would point to would be at the Rams, right? Because that's going to be in a stretch Monday night, November 11th. So if you think, let's say they win Sunday, get to 3-4, lose at Buffalo, then they're 3-5. Then they've got at the Rams. They cannot afford to lose that game. So that gets you to 4-5 if you win. Then the Raiders and Patriots at home, back-to-back. Raiders, Patriots. If you could then string together a 3-game winning streak of Rams, Raiders, Patriots, then you're over 500. Even if you lose at Green Bay on Thanksgiving night, you've set yourself up for contention entering those final 5 games of Jets twice, 49ers, Houston, at Cleveland, which looks a lot less concerning than it did before the season. So that, to me, is the path to be in wild card contention at the end of the year. It requires a win against Arizona. It requires a win in a game you don't necessarily expect them to win, like at Rams, maybe at Packers. At Rams obviously seems like the easier course, but they're going to have to win one of these games. They can't merely win the games that they're going to be favored to win, because that's not going to get them to the playoffs, because they've dug themselves a hole because of injury, because of poor decisions with roster management. So there's going to have to be a surprise win in here to give themselves any sort of chance going into that final week of the season, January.
I don't disagree with you, but I look at this season in quarters, and right now you need to go 4-5 in this quarter. Now, if you lose to Arizona, that means you just got to beat Buffalo, and you got to take care of business. And as I wrote in a column in the Miami Herald, this 4 or 5 stretch is critical. You gotta, if you walk away 3-5, then that puts pressure on the final quarter of the season. So you got to take care of business now. And if you don't, then it's going to put pressure on Chris Greer and the organization. So I think everybody, including Tua Tagovailoa, including Mike McDaniel, you're playing for people's job securities right now. I wrote 2 columns in the Miami Herald this week that I stand on, and I truly believe. I've always had this rule, Barry. When you lose, you face the heat, you get the criticism. When you win, you get the praise, you get the applause. We write nice, fluffy features and tell you how great everybody is. I expected them to beat the Colts. They didn't win against the Colts. And I think it's intensified the pressure that's placed on Chris Greer, the general manager who's built this team. Me and you have both been on board with the fact that, hey, sorry, but this is a poorly built roster. And you more than me, you've masked a lot of things, in my opinion, because of upper echelon quarterback play. I know people say upper echelon. What are you talking about? But I think Tua's efficiency masked a lot of your shortcomings. And when you didn't have him, it exposed a lot of your issues. From a discipline standpoint, I also wrote a column about Mike McDaniel and this whole loosey-goosey approach that he runs an organization, which, mind you, Barry, and I'm openly admitting to this, I'm in support of. I'm in support of a player-run team. Now, on the flip side of that, when you're an undisciplined team and people can't look to you to discipline your team, that, you know, these are the prices that you might pay. It puzzled me that, you know, throughout the history of Mike McDaniel's tenure, he's got one demotion, and that's Durham Smythe. And he didn't even lose his job to Jonnu Smith. He lost his job to the most mistake-making player on the entire team, which is Julian Hill. So, you know, so even that has some polarity to it, because it's like, okay, you demoted one guy and then you put in the guy who makes the absolute most mistakes on the team, but he's pretty good as a run blocker. At some point, knowing the history of this organization, Steve Ross is going to look at the byproduct of what he sees this season, and he's going to say, who's responsible? Whose head should I offer to the people? Because you know us, Barry, we're going to require a head. You know, somebody's going to hold up a head as a sacrifice. This is our sacrifice to you for the season that you've had. And if it happens to be Chris Grier, we could potentially, not necessarily how Steve Ross operates, but we could be looking at a full-scale reset. So everybody in the organization needs to realize, hey, the pressure is now. The elimination games have begun.
Yes, I'd be shocked if McDaniel's not here next year. I think there are more questions, as you said, about Chris Grier's status than ever before, because Steve Ross would have to be a buffoon if he looked at this roster and said, you know what, this is a roster that's really well built. Now, I don't think Grier has done a terrible job, but he has simply made too many mistakes to not look at it, starting with, and everyone I know can make mistakes in individual drafts, but once he passed on Watt to take Charles Harris, that certainly should have raised him at 10A. And then just the mismanaging of quarterback, obviously with the second rounder for Josh Rosen and not using him, and all of the mistakes in the draft.
You're bringing up old stuff, Barry. You're bringing up real old stuff.
Yes, all this is fair. Yes. Yeah. Oh, to me, the Harris Watt thing should forever be the indictment. I know there were a lot of guys who passed on TJ Watt, but to me, if you're evaluating edge players and you determine that Charles Harris is a better prospect than TJ Watt, and you evaluate Big 12 7th round quarterbacks and you determine that Skylar Thompson is better than Brock Purdy, I mean, at some point there has to be accountability. So I don't think Grier has done an awful job. I just don't think he's done enough of a good job. So this will be telling. But I want to add this also. This schedule, as it turns out, is not nearly as daunting as people think. So no one should say they had a tough schedule. It's just the opposite. Jets stink. They're 2-5. So you get them, you get New England, which is a full rebuild. So that's 4 games. Exactly. Cleveland stinks, which nobody expected. That game should be easier. Rams aren't very good, even though they beat Minnesota last night. So this is a schedule that there is no reason, even with the injuries they've had, that they cannot finish strong and at least be 9-8, be in the running for 7th playoff seed. If they fall short of that, do not blame the schedule, because it's much easier than how it looked in April.
Absolutely. So, Barry, how are you feeling about Sunday against the Arizona Cardinals? Is this going to be the Kyler Murray show, in your opinion?
I would lean Dolphins 21-17, but I don't do it with any confidence. As I told you at the start of the show, I'm just very concerned about not having Sieler, and I'm concerned about the offense's rust in general, Tua and others, because of lack of time, obviously, together, and the fact that Tua hasn't played in 5 weeks. So I'm saying Dolphins, sort of hoping it into existence so that we have a relevant, interesting season, but I'm not confident. How about you?
To me, it's going to be a 24. I'm pretty much 17 game. I think it's going to be Dolphins. I think this is the return of Tua. People know I'm no closet Tua fan. I'm out. And it's the efficiency that he produces, the play, the aura. You know, everybody talks about it. He's Tua, man. He's got a presence to him. I expected that presence to take over the NFL years ago. It hasn't. He has not been clutch in those fourth quarter moments or games. But I think that this break, this stretch, probably will probably help him take his game to another level, and that's my hope. Now, if his egg gets scrambled again, and we're right here with Skylar Thompson as a starter, then find the reset button. But I'm a believer in Tua. Hopefully, he can stay healthy, and hopefully, he can turn around the Dolphins season and get this thing. We all know the offense has been holding it back, Barry. Let's take off the brake off his car.
I have to make one more point before you end the show, because you and I did not have a chance to talk on this show, at least since the Monday press conference. To me, the big takeaway from the Monday press conference was Tua Tagovailoa could have 2 or 3 more concussions, and I think he still wants to keep playing. So to me, even if, God forbid, he has another one this year where he's out for the season, I don't know that the Dolphins will conclude, oh, Tua is going to retire, because he's not going to retire, and we have to replace him. So I think that merely reinforces what's happened this year is that they need a far better backup, a starting caliber backup. But to me, the biggest takeaway Monday was, as Tua said, I'm going to play, God forbid, to the death of me if needed. So he will keep coming back from these concussions. Hopefully there are no more. But to me, that at least should give the Dolphins a little peace of mind. I don't know if that's the right phrasing, that he is not thinking about retirement. He will keep playing through these concussions as long as he doesn't have symptoms that linger. Obviously, if he has symptoms that linger, then he will essentially be forced to retire. But that wasn't the case with this one. So obviously, they need to get a better backup next year, because any future absence by Tua will be extended as long as this one was, or perhaps even longer. So I want to get that in on the show with you.
And let me say this, for those who do not understand Tua's mindset, if you ask most players who are even going through some issues, I saw Chris Chambers and Zach Thomas today going at Baptist Health Facility, and every player goes through issues once their career is over. If you asked every single one of them if they would do it over again, knowing the risks, knowing all that comes with it, knowing the pain that they would live through, I would probably put a 96 percentile on it in terms of the guys who would do it all over again. Tua loves the game. Tua is playing the game that he loves, to do it, living out his childhood dream. Imagine somebody living out their childhood dream, and you saying, you know what, you've got enough, you've got had too many concussions, you should probably consider walking away from it. It's not going to happen. And more importantly, and I think we don't really understand because we don't understand fully his culture, but Tua is the face of Polynesian football. He's the face of an entire culture of people who love a sport and root for him to and on. He is this era's Junior Seau, this era's Troy Polamalu. And as you know from covering Polynesian players and Polynesian people, they pride themselves on their toughness. Do you think that Tua is going to go out without the reputation of, I did everything that I could to fight through this and I toughed it out? He absolutely will. So that's why I always knew all this retirement talk, we were wasting our time. Save your breath, because this guy is probably going to have to be wheeled off the field to end his career. So
yeah, right on. Great points. This is a guy who wants to do this for a living, and even if hopefully not, there's another concussion or two, I don't see it forcing him out of the game unless there's sustained symptoms. That would always be the asterisk with this.
Yeah, definitely. On that note, this is fine. This is another episode of Dolphins in Depth. We will be back on Monday to recap what happened against the Arizona Cardinals. Best of luck. Everybody stay safe. And if you are celebrating Halloween this weekend, be safe about it. And we will see you on Monday.